Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to give you both a breakdown of the image quality from the little inexpensive Zonlai 22mm f1.8 lens, and also to kind of render my final verdict on the lens. And so, if you haven't already, I would encourage you to look at this first look episode. It's where I break down, kind of what the lens is. Probably most of you are not familiar with Zonlai as a company, nor was I prior to this review. And this will give you an idea about the lens itself and how it functions, its price point, its handling. I did note in that episode that this is, while it's a manual everything, manual focus, manual aperture ring, that it was a nicely made lens. And so the one thing I will note on that is that this is the second copy that I have looked at. And I noted in that first look that the first copy I had that it didn't quite click perfectly into the f16 detent. It's like that tolerance didn't live quite enough room for that to fully click into that. The second copy here is a little bit better. At the same time, it doesn't naturally go right there. It requires a little extra bit of effort, and then you can hear it click into place. So better, still not perfect on that. And so anyway, just an update on that. Today, however, our priority is looking at how the lens performs optically. And so we're going to jump in and we're going to look at test of a number of different things, from distortion to flare to sharpness and contrast, chromatic aberration control, all of those things. So let's jump in, let's take a look. Okay, we're going to take a look at the performance of the Zonlai 22mm f1.8. And so as you can see, looking at the wide open f1.8 result, you can see a few things here. Number one, you can see that there's definitely some bulge here in the center. And so we do have some field curvature that's taking place there. You can see also that at the center portion of the frame, there is a sweet spot here that is incredibly sharp and crisp, and with really fantastic contrast. There's basically no chromatic aberration at all that I'm seeing there, and so as a result, the micro contrast is actually really high. That's a surprising result from such an inexpensive optic. What we can also see is, due to the nature of that bulge and the depth of field here, what we're seeing is that the edges are not nearly as sharp. And part of that is a drop off of depth of field. However, also there is some native softness that's there. Now, interestingly, if I focus the image here on the left side, for example, we can see that field curvature is a pretty big component of what's taking place here. And so you can see that the left portion of the image is very sharp, but the center, as you can see, and the right are very soft. And so, there may also be a bit of a centering issue. And so I actually brought in a second copy to investigate. So what we can see here, if we put the two of them side by side, is that in the center of the frame, we're getting a pretty similar result here. It was a little bit different time of day, a little different light. So color temperature, maybe vary because they weren't shot at identical times. But what I'm more interested in seeing is the performance on the side. And so what we're seeing here is that the second copy on the edge of the frame, it's performing a little bit better. In fact, that looks pretty decent for a wide open f1.8 option. It's not quite as good on the left side, but at the same time, it does look a bit better, at least in terms of the sharpness profile extending a little further than what the first copy did. So since the Zonlai is a lens without electronics, there is no profile either in camera or automatically going to be applied in Lightroom. And while there may be a future profile available, there isn't one right now, the lens being so new. And so what you're seeing here is a profile that I created, and I will make this available to my patrons. But it's a one-click import preset, and so what it's doing is it's clearing up some vignette, as you can see, vignette being pretty heavy, and then also dealing with the distortion pattern here. And so byproduct of that is that we're seeing a little kind of cleaner kind of lift And so a little bit more even result here across frame. So you can see if you move in from that side a little bit, even at f1.8, sharpness, starts to kick up pretty quick there. And where the lens is sharp, it's extremely sharp. So here you'll see the very, very mild stop down to f2. And as you can see, the camera actually didn't meter any differently between f1.8 on the left and f2 on the right. Now, ironically, because there is less vignette, there is a vignette lift there already, the result on the right actually looks like it's a little bit brighter, although technically it should be a little bit darker. But you can see on a global level that vignette has lifted a little bit, and so already if you'll stop down to f2, you'll see a very mild improvement in vignette, but enough to make a difference. In terms of sharpness, I do think there's just a little tiny bit more sharpness and contrast. As you can see, for example, this area, it's a little bit brighter, but fairly close. Looking out towards the edge of the frame here on the right side, we see that, it's a little bit brighter, so things look a little cleaner, but I do also think there may be a little bit of an improvement. Now, from here on out, we're going to look at our comparisons with the profile attached, and so we can see a little more even result. So here on the left, we have the f2 result. On the right, we have the f2.8 result. So you can see that there is a very noticeable improvement at f2.8, and you can see that sharpness in the center of the frame is pretty much what I would call perfect. That is resolving, I would say, pretty close to the whole sensor there on the A6500. And as we move further out, we can also see that we're getting sharpness further across the frame compared to f2. And now we can see that really at f2.8, the right side looks pretty decent. Now looking over at the left side looks still pretty soft by comparison. And, again, whether that's that decentering, but we can see that the sharpness profile is reaching out into the edge, but it's not quite there. So now if we compare f2.8 on the left and f4 on the right, we're going to see that in the center of the frame, I wouldn't say that there's any sharpness gain that is taking place here. I think sharpness in the center of the frame has peaked at f2.8. And looking out towards the edge of the frame, there is a very mild improvement between f2.8 and f4, but it's more about kind of that sharpness profile reaching a little bit further out into the frame. Right side actually looks quite good. Left side, we see that, again, you can see sharpness is reaching a little bit further. And I would say that that's more because depth of field is increasing than it is about the left side actually being soft, as we saw when we focused on it. Now, if we take it a step further to f5.6, I do think that there is a bit of an improvement here at f5.6 once again, and f5.6 being one of the peak landscape apertures. But as you can see here, even at close distance, that really sharpness on the right side of the frame is, if not perfect, it is close to that levels at f5.6. And we can also see now that while the left side is not perfectly sharp, it is certainly into the good range, and so certainly usable at that point. Now this is back to the first copy here, and so we saw that the second copy is maybe a little bit more consistent, but you can see at a landscape type aperture that at landscape apertures, that is stunningly good. And I want you to note how fantastic the color rendition and the contrast is. It really is quite an amazing little landscape lens in the center of the frame, and we can see even here on the edge it looks pretty good. Not as perfect as the center, but good there on the right side. Over here on the left side, we can see that it, particularly in this first copy, is softer on the left side, which kind of shows it to be more of an optical defect, since field curvature at this distance wouldn't be playing the same kind of role. And so it's as if both sides and the center can't all be sharp at the same time. Now here's just a few more kind of real world examples for you to look at. And so here, kind of really hazy light, sun right there in the frame, but we can see that, sharpness here is exquisite. This is the first copy here. And so, in this particular photo here, the left side to me doesn't look bad. It looks fine, and the right side also looks fine. And so it may depend on your subject matter as well. This is the shot that really kind of stood out to me that I mentioned in the first look episode, that when I looked at this on my laptop, which does have a 4K screen, and right now I've just switched to a new BenQ SW271 4K monitor that I'll be reviewing shortly, and it is a fantastic display. But I mean, the amount of detail that is resolved here, and then of course the color accuracy. The color is really surprising to me at such an inexpensive lens. But we can see here across the frame, we're getting great sharpness. I mean, even out here on the left side, it looks really, really good. That's a stunning result from a lens that costs, around 150 bucks. I mean, that is fantastic. Now, even at f1.8, you'll see that the lens has just great sharpness. And here we've got a situation that really is designed to, I was shooting to also bring out chromatic aberration. And so you've got a lot of high contrast zones here, but you can see this faintest bit of purple fringing right there is about as much CA as you're going to see. I don't know that I've ever seen such an inexpensive prime like this that is so well controlled for chromatic aberrations. It really is just, it's just doing a great job. These kind of snowy branches like this, again, are really high potentials for chromatic aberrations. And you can see just looking at the image, and I'll zoom in here just so we can take a closer peek, that CA just isn't there. And so, I mean, great job in controlling those. I'll just show you this image for the fun of it. This is spring in Canada. We had another rogue winter storm come through, and so as you can see, it takes a while. This is April here in Canada, but once again, you can see on a budget, we have got a beautiful landscape lens here with lots of detail here across the frame. Now, I mentioned the fact that chromatic aberrations are really low and color rendition is really great. And so the byproduct of this is that this is really and because it's so small and light, it's a really nice kind of street general purpose type lens. And so if you're shooting it like this, that incredible center sharpness, this is at f1.8, you can see that the center sharpness is just brilliantly good. Contrast is perfect. There's no chromatic aberrations. And so when having the, extreme edges, where it's not important for those to be sharp, the lens is really perfect for this kind of application. You can add to this the fact that, the color rendition being so good, it means that it's an unobtrusive lens to take along into various settings. And, it just works well, obviously, here in low light conditions. A really great result inside a restaurant here. Now, another real strength of the lens is that it has a very, very close focus distance and thus a nice reproduction ratio. And so as you can see here, that number one, I use the metal cap from this. This, is a place that would show a lot of chromatic aberration. And once again, you can see it's really not there. Resolution here, center of the frame, even at the very narrow depth of field, is very nice. But if you look at the quality of the background blur in this kind of setting, it's actually surprisingly good. And the color looks nice and rich. I mean, frankly, this picture looks like it was taken by a much more expensive lens. Here's another example at a fairly close focus distance. And so here, obviously, there's a lot more hard edges to be grabbed. At this kind of focus distance, however, or this degree of blur, I think that it's done a really nice job. Colors here are nice. And you can see that on the petal of the, early spring flower here, that there is some nice detail. Now, in this particular image, this is an image that has a lot of hard edges. And here you can see there's also a lot in the transition zone. And so here I definitely think that there is a little bit more busyness than what I would like. And so in this kind of scene, maybe the more budget origins of the lens is betrayed. At the same time, though, that's not a bad result. And I've seen similar results out of much more expensive lenses. This is either f1.8 or f2, and so you can see at a portrait distance, the lens has done a nice job with skin tones here. And also here you can see how it's handled just a busy kind of, bare woods background here. And so the one place that is this transition zone here, you know, it's a little bit, sometimes we call that nervous or a little bit busy. But, you know, frankly, that's again, once again, a pretty nice result for the price you're paying. Now here's another kind of casual portrait image that shows you the, you know, the foreground rendering. But I wanted to show you how nice the contrast is from the lens. And you can see that it's shown nice detail at this kind of distance. And so, you know, it does make for a reasonable portrait lens if you want to do environmental portraits. Gives you some flexibility there. Here's another, and this is actually at only about f2, but you can see that even at this kind of distance that it's rendered quite well. And, you know, I'm very happy with that kind of result from this kind of lens. Now here we can see with the lens stopped down that it produces a nice looking sunburst effect here. You can see that, you know, details are nice, but there is some ghosting, as you can see here, as well as a bit of veiling in that general area. Now in this case, I've just allowed the sun to skim around the trunk of the tree. That gives you that nice sunburst effect. But if I stop the lens down and I put the, you know, the sun, you know, more directly into the frame, we can see that the ghosting pattern has become a little bit more destructive here. At the same time, it's not all a loss here. I mean, we can see that detail has been rendered fine. Contrast has held up pretty good, other than in this, you know, kind of ghosting effect here. You know, and so there's definitely some negatives and some positives there. You just need to kind of position the sun appropriately and be aware that flare can be a problem. At the same time, I think that the colors of the image are nice. I really like the way it's taking care of this zone right here. So as you can see, in many ways, the little Zonlai 22mm f1.8 lens really outperforms its price point. And this is not another lens that has a large aperture that is essentially useless, but even at f1.8, this lens in the center portion of the frame, which is where you of course most need it for a lot of different types of photography, is actually really sharp, has great contrast, and very, very low chromatic aberration. Add to that the fact that it has a great magnification figure and you know, is easy to focus and has a great focus ring, and you have what is, if you're not intimidated by manual focus, that is a great walk-around lens. It's a useful, versatile focal length, and it does a lot of things quite well. What we also found is that in the two different copies that I examined, to varying degrees, there was what I would say in hindsight is a centering issue. And if not an exact centering issue, sometimes even a lens element can be tilted a little bit. Byproduct of that is that, as we saw, that at wide apertures where depth of field is quite small, that the lens was incapable in either one of these copies of focusing consistently across the frame. And so different portions of the frame, most notably the left portion of the frame, did not focus at the same degree as the center and even the right side of the frame. And so obviously that's an issue that I would hope that Zonlai will improve in time. That being said, for those of you that are maybe scared away by what I've just said, note that in actual regular field use, before I formally tested the lens, I actually, I took it on a trip, shot lots of images, reviewed a lot of images, and I came home thinking, wow, that is a fantastically sharp lens, and I can't wait to run it through my formal testing, and so that I can kind of verify what I saw. And of course, what I discovered was this centering issue. But my point is that in regular real-world shooting, it actually was not really a factor. And really the only places where it might have been a factor is when I wanted sharpness from corner to corner, and there was one side that was a little softer than the others. But you know, bottom line is that even with this, you know, slightly decentered copy here, I still think that it's a great performer for you know, for practical use, and certainly for the price point. And if you're stopped down to, you know, a typical landscape aperture, you know, kind of the place where you would want sharpness from edge to edge, I found that, you know, the lens sharpened up to the degree to where it still performed quite nicely at landscape apertures, even on what was the softer side of the frame. For most shooting, however, that centering issue was not really a factor. And of course, as we found, the sharpness of the lens is actually good even at the, to some degree, even on the edges of the frame at f1.8, if that's where you're trying to focus. So that's certainly a good news, and maybe better news than if the lens was just, irreconcilably soft along the edges of the frame. So, it's a little bit complicated, and of course, when you're dealing with an inexpensive lens, maybe you shouldn't expect the same kind of tolerances of a lens that cost $1,000 or more. And this lens is far from costing that. And if you're willing to live with that kind of minor weakness, and of course also a little bit of an issue with ghosting if the sun is in the frame, but if you're willing to deal with those things, what I found is that this was a lens that I actually really, really liked because of the great color rendition, the really nice little compact form factor. For a lot of people that do mirrorless, lenses this size are the whole reason that you do mirrorless. I mean, something that is small and compact and easy to use. And so if you are, looking for a great performing prime lens and you've got a limited budget, this is a very nice little lens, and of course makes for a very attractive video option as well because it is so sharp there at the center of the frame, great contrast. So you don't have, and the very low CA is something that's a big deal to me because clearing up CA in video is extremely difficult. Clearing up very heavy vignette in video production is extremely difficult. The fact that those things are not a factor makes this lens a keeper in a lot of ways. And so I would encourage you to take a look at the, the image gallery that I've got below. Also, you'll find in the description a link to my full written review, more samples there, more things that are covered as a part of that. Take a look at that as well. There are some buying links if you'd like to purchase one of these little guys for yourself. And by the way, those of you who are put off by the fact that this is a silver lens, note that it also comes in a traditional black finish as well. You can get it either way. Maybe for some of you the silver is a good thing, others it stands out and it's loud. Don't worry, black is also an option. So take a look there, and you can purchase one for yourself. And as always, you can find linkage to become one of my patrons and to get that profile that I mentioned that will help to correct for distortion in vignette. If you're one of my patrons, I'll make that available to you. And then also, of course, you can sign up for my newsletter that goes out weekly with fresh articles. And then also on about a monthly, every 5-6 weeks, I put out a more detailed email, sometimes with some exclusive giveaways as a part of that and access to content. So you'd want to sign up for that as well. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.